Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. The topic of the share is the Hagaddah, but I wanted to start because this year, Erev Pesach is on Shabbos, and Erev Pesach is on Shabbos.
We lost audio. We can't hear you. What happened? Um,
Okay, you hear me?
yeah, I think I know what happened.
Okay. So this year, Erev Pesach is Shabbos Hagadol, and one of the discussions that really we see even in the time of the Rishonim is why is the Shabbos before Pesach called Shabbos Hagadol? There is a minority opinion or practice, a minhag, that some of the Mefarshim would call the Shabbos before any one of the Shlosh Regalim as Shabbos Hagadol. No, it's the Shabbos before Shavuos would be the Shabbos Hagadol of Shavuos. The Shabbos before Sukkot, when there is a Shabbos before Sukkot, that would be the Shabbos Hagadol of Sukkot. There was such a practice, but that certainly was not the predominant practice. However, the predominant practice is to only the Shabbos before Pesach is called Shabbos Hagadol. And the Rishonim give all kinds of reasons for it, because that year that Pesach was first observed in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, when they gave the Korban Pesach, so they took the lamb, which was the god, certainly of certain groups in Egypt, and they tied it to the posts of their bed. And many of the Egyptians were just totally upset with the way the Jewish people were acting towards their God, meaning the God of the Egyptians. And because of that, they planned to make a pogrom, if I could use that word, contemporary word, a pogrom against the Jewish people. And then they were overcome with some type of sickness that prevented them from doing it. Others say that at that point, when the Jewish people started taking the lamb and tied it to their bed, that to use as the Korban Pesach, so the Bechorim, who were aware of the fact that unless the Jewish people are able to leave Egypt, they made a revolt against Paro, and the Chorim of Egypt, the firstborn of Egypt, and they themselves killed many Egyptians, of their fellow Egyptians, those who supported Paro. And they say, that's why we say, Lemake Mitzrayim bivchoreim, to hit or to cause damage to Egypt with the Bechorim. In other words, that the firstborn of Egypt killed many of the Egyptians, and some say that happened on the Shabbos before Pesach. Pesach was Thursday, was Wednesday night. So the Shabbos beforehand, the Bechorim revolted, and many Egyptians were killed. And because of that, it's called Shabbos Hagadol. There are all kinds of other opinions why it's called Shabbos Hagadol. But to be honest, I have trouble why it's called Shabbos Hagadol because of those reasons. In other words, why is that associated with godless? Godless could mean greatness. Godless could mean godless can mean it's identified with maturity. Godless could mean big, but with these reasons, why is it called Shabbos Hagadol? And also, the question raised, not that there aren't answers, there are answers. So these were things that happened to have happened on the 10th of Nisan. So when the Jewish people took the animals, took the lambs to set them aside to be used on the 14th as sacrifices. So why identify this event with Shabbos? True, it was Shabbos that year. I identify it with the 10th of Nisan. Now, the truth of the matter is, Shabbos is identified with Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the question is, Pesach, we understand how it's identified with Yetzias Mitzrayim, with the Exodus from Egypt. The whole Seder, the refraining from eating chametz, all of that is associated with the Jewish people leaving Egypt. But the question is, why? What does it have to do with Shabbos? So how is Shabbos zeicher Yetzias Mitzrayim? It's mentioned that Moshe Rabbeinu had manipulated Paro early on to perhaps give the Jews a break on Shabbos. Okay, but I think we say the Rambam in the Igros mentions Paro hu hayetzahara. Paro, it's a letter, I think, to his son Rabbeinu Avram. He says Paro himself is the Yetzirah. What does that mean? That Paro is the Yetzirah. Now, years ago, he didn't mention this. He didn't mention the Rambam in the Igros. One of my rebbeim in high school, he was was in a shir. He was the Chumash Rebbe that I had in high school. Reb Shmuel David Herman. He was the grandson of the person that's known in the book All for the Boss. So he once mentioned the question. He suggested a pshat, and while I don't think that's necessarily the pshat in the pasuk, but the idea is certainly true. He says, but it says, Boel Paro, come to Paro, Kani hirbaditi es libo veslevavadav, Laman shisi osusayela bekirbo, Ulaman tesaper bozne bincha ben bincha es asher es halalti b'mitzrayim. Go to Paro, and because I harden his heart in order that I should perform these miracles, and in order to perform the miracles of the makos, of the plagues, and in order that you should talk to your children and your children's children for all generations about how I toyed with Paro. Paro in Mitzrayim. And the question is that the reason? The Torah should have said, go to Paro, even though I harden his heart, even though I know he won't listen to you. Why go to Paro? Because I harden his heart. And so my Rebbe in the high school, of Shmuel David Herman, so he said, I don't remember if he quoted in somebody's name or it was his own answer. He said that go see how low a person can become. Paro sees his whole kingdom crumbling. You have the Makos, and he's going to continue. You should know that you could have the same thing that Paro had. And the Rambam in the Hilchos Tshuva says that sometimes it comes to a point when a person continuously sins, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to some degree, completely removes their Bechira Chavshitz, their freedom of choice. So we have to take a lesson from Paro. This is, to a certain degree, I think, a real Musar. Not Musar that you necessarily have to give speeches about, but Musar that a person has to learn. Isn't just from reading Mesilas Yesharim, which is a very terrific sefer, no question about it. But it can't be limited to that. Sometimes when you look at life, you see what happens to individuals. You see individuals who rise to the top of the community. Individuals who have everything. Individuals who everybody looks up to. And sometimes in a matter of a couple minutes, they fall from their height, from their economic security that they have, being from the richest people in the community, people who are leaders in other areas. And in 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, things take place. That's what you can really learn Mussar from. And in a sense, what the pshat was. Look at Paro, learn, because you can also turn into a Paro. Now, I think there's a different shot in the pasuk, but I think that's what the Rambam means when the Rambam says, Paro hu hayetzahara. There is a Paro in us, in each one of us. We can become like Paro. So we can become like Paro also, and we can become like Paro in many ways. And not only we can become like Paro, we sometimes have become like Paro. An example: Paro enslaved the Jews. Paro, we can enslave ourselves. It's important to work. The philosophy that work is a terrible thing that sometimes is taught and given over in the yeshiva world, either consciously or unconsciously. Explicitly or implicitly, and sometimes not from the Rebbeim, but from the fellow students, from other Talmidim. Work is good, but a person can't be a slave. You have to work. Yigiach kapecha kisochal ashrecha b'tov lach. But there's a difference between working and being a slave. And sometimes you can be a slave to your boss, and sometimes you can be a slave to yourself. If everything else loses its importance, and the only thing that's important is your job, family is pushed aside. Everything else is pushed aside. Religious commitment is pushed aside. Community involvement is pushed aside. Everything else is pushed aside because you want to even to make money. But if that becomes the priority, then you become a slave to yourself. You can become your own paro. You enslaved yourself. And I think the idea of Shabbos, the Isur Melacha of Shabbos, it's not the fact that we refrain from doing work. Listen, some of the work actually can make things easier for us. But the idea that there's one day that we're not involved in mundane work, besides the fact that the impact it has upon us about HaKadosh Baruch Hu as being the Borei Olam, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu rested b'Yom HaShvi, but it lets us know that the work of the other 6 days was not a form of slavery. It's a form of work. So the idea of Shabbos reminds us that we are not slaves. And the Jewish people, we see even after Yetzias Mitzrayim to a certain degree, when they already left Egypt, they were no longer in the physical bondage of Egypt. But unfortunately, time and time again, they were in the psychological bondage of Egypt. Sechanu esadoga. We remember how good it was in Egypt. They would constantly want to go back to Egypt. They rebelled against Moshe and against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They talk about how it would have been better for us to be in Egypt than dying in the midbar, than dying in the desert. The lack of bitachon, the non-recognition of everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for them. And sometimes, even worse than that, sometimes there is a transference. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I mentioned in the previous year that according to one sheet in Yerushalmi, the 4 cups correspond with the 4 times by Yosef and the Sar Hamashkim, Kos Paro Biyadi is mentioned, the cup of Paro. Our 4 cups are the cups of Paro. But the truth is, so how can we compare the 4 cups to the cups of Paro? But we could suggest either that the cup of Paro now becomes our cup. We see Pesach by the Seder, there's royalty. Or, according to the Shita, that the whole mitzvah, the main mitzvah, Dalikosis, al Seder Hagaddah, we could suggest that the cup of Paro, as I mentioned in the share previous Shiurim, the cup of Paro comes now the cup of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes the king. But sometimes there is a negative impact on that, and we begin to because we don't recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because we take out that our anger against Paro, we take out on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Kos Paro is said, the Hagaddah is said over it. That makes it the Kos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We become the butler of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's true, we drink from it, and it's even a form of cherus, because Avadai Haim below Avadim Lavadim. But we have to recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the king. And we have to recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu as king is the one who took us out of Mitzrayim. When you take a look at the Birchas Kriya Shema, we say that Hashkivenu is a Gula Richta. We say Baruch Hashem La'olam Amen V'Amen. Those who say it is a Gula Richta. It's an extension of our redemption. Why is it a Gula Richta? But they all talk about all these brachas. Hashkivenu, Baruch Hashem, L'olam Amen, V'Amen has reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu being Melech. The HaKadosh God being Melech is accompanied by the fact that God is our Redeemer. God is our Savior. So when we instead of when we make the transference, we have to make the transference of Paro to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, that Hakadosh Baruch Hu is our Savior. He's our King. He's our King because he saved us from the hands of Paro, and because of that. So in other words, when we observe Shabbos, we are saying that we're no longer slaves. We are servants of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, but avadahem below avadim la'avadim. When we become servants of God, we cease to be slaves of man, and that's what Shabbos. When we refrain from malacha, we recognize that we're no longer slaves of any man, and not even of ourselves. So this is perhaps how Shabbos can be viewed as being Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now, however, and when the Jewish people took the carbon, the lamb, and they tied it to their beds in front of the Egyptians, what was the purpose? The purpose was to rid themselves of this servile perspective. So long as they were slaves, they were scared of the Egyptians. Here they demonstrated that they're no longer slaves of the Egyptians. So this is why perhaps the miracle of the taking of the lamb, of tying the lamb to the bedposts, and the Egyptians being unable to do any harm to the Jews, is identified with Shabbos, because the purpose of Shabbos is to recognize we are no longer slaves of any person, and it's also to recognize that, and this was part of the idea of taking the lamb and tying it to the bedposts in defiance of the Egyptians. But I want to suggest a different reason, and with the understanding of this reason, we will be able to understand certain parts of the Hagaddah. Now, the Marshal, in suggesting why Shabbos, the Marshal is brought down. I saw it in Rav Kasher's Hagaddah, and it's in the section from page 50 to page 54. And where he discusses the different opinions why Shabbos is called Shabbos Hagadol.
50 to 54 in the Hagaddah Shlema?
The Hagaddah Shlema, yeah. Not the Hagaddah Eretz Yisraelis. Rav Kasher put out, that I know, two Haggadahs. One is Hagaddah Eretz Yisraelis, and the other is Hagaddah Shlema. And this was an Hagaddah Shlema. Hagaddah Shlema is the Lamdisha Hagaddah. So so he mentions that Sefer Mata Moshe, who was a Talmud of the Marshal, said that the Marshal suggested, but then the Marshal took it back, that the reason Shabbos Hagadol is called Shabbos Hagadol is because in the Haftorah it says, Hinei, at the end of the Haftorah, Hinei Anochi Sholeach Lochem Es Eliyah Hanavi Lefnei Bo Yom Hashem Hagadol v'Hanora. Yom Hagadol v'Hanora, that's identified with the coming of Mashiach. I send you Eliyahu the prophet before the great and awesome day of Hashem. That's the coming of Mashiach. Okay, so he says, it's named after this pasuk in the Haftorah. But the Marshal, after suggesting that possibility, rejected it. And why did he reject it? He says, because we talk about Shabbos Chazon. We talk about Shabbos Nachmu. When we name a Shabbos on the basis of the Haftorah, he says, it's based on the first words of the Haftorah. It's not in the second to last pasuk or third to last pasuk, as we repeat, Well, could we repeat the pasuk at the end? Okay, but it's the second to last pasuk in terms of the parsha and the nevi'im. We always name it if a Shabbos is named on the basis of Haftorah. The Shabbos is named on the basis of the first words of the Haftorah. So I want this to. I like the answer of the Marshal, but perhaps I have a different perspective of it. That the question of the Marshal would not be a problem. Now, when we take a look at the Halachmanya, if we take a look at the Halachmanya starts out with the Hilu Yatsu Yisrael Mitzrayim, where according to the Rambam, we start the Halachmanya. This is the poor man's bread that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. That's how we started out. But the minhag of the Rambam, and I think that's the minhag of many of the Sfardim, is to start the Halachmanya with the words "B'vihilu yatzu avoseinu mitzrayim." In a rush, did our ancestors leave the land of Egypt? Halachmanya the chalav the son of our Mitzrayim. This is the poor man's bread that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Now, the question is, why did the Rambam add it? Now, the Gemara mentions many reasons why matzah is called lechamoni. And my uncle more or less says this without mentioning the Gemara as pshat in the Rambam. One of the reasons mentioned is because matzah is made very quickly. It's like when a poor man and his wife work together to cook food. It's something that's done very quickly. And we say, matzah zu shano chumel shuma. Why do we eat this matzah? Because the Jewish people went out from Egypt and they didn't have time. They didn't have time for the dough to rise. HaKadosh Baruch Hu u'ga'olam, and he redeemed them, and the Rambam adds the words miyad. In our Hagadol, we don't say it, but it's implied anyway. But the Rambam says it explicitly, miyad. The matzah is the symbol of something that's done quickly. Matzah has to be baked quickly. So the Gula took place very quickly. So Vihilu, the Jewish people, that's the introduction according to the Rambam of the Halachmanya. In a rush did the Jewish people go out of Egypt. Halachmanya, this is the poor man's bread that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. It was done quickly. And in a sense, it's, I think, a lesson. It's a lesson to future generations that Geula can take place very quickly. In other words, we are in Gullus, we are in exile now. If you take a look at the Lashon of the Rambam, at the introduction, at the Nusach Hagaddah, he says, this is the Nusach of the Hagaddah that the Jewish people say in exile. He emphasizes that point. He doesn't say, this is the Nusach of the Hagaddah that we say today. But this is the Nusach of the Hagaddah that the Jewish people say in exile. It's true, there are differences in the Hagaddah. Hillel did this way when the Beis Hamikdash was Kayim. Okay, there are differences. But the Rambam, I think, is emphasizing it's when they're in exile. Why is he emphasizing this is the Nusach of the Hagaddah of exile? Because the Rambam, I think, his shita is that we have to look at the redemption of the Jewish people from Mitzrayim as a blueprint for the redemption of the Jewish people from their exile. A matter of fact, we have to look at the salvation of the Jewish people from Egypt as a blueprint for the salvation of the Jewish people that will take place from generation to generation. We say, B'chol dor v'dor in the Hagaddah, in every generation, but we say in every generation and generation. I mentioned this before. In every generation and generation, they stand on us to destroy us, to wipe us out. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves us from the hands. And the question is, I didn't see anybody ask it, but to me it seems it's an obvious question. What does it say? B'chol dor v'dor, in every generation and generation. It just should say just b'chol dor. Why b'chol dor v'dor? And the answer is, whatever the philosophical disposition of the generation is, they use that as an excuse to try to kill the Jew, to wipe out the Jew. If there's a disposition towards communism, the Jew is anti-communist. If there is a disposition against communism in a certain generation, then the Jew is a communist. Whatever the ideological attitude of the generation is, they will try to find a chesaron. They will try to find a fault in the Jew on that basis. Take a look what is happening on the college campuses in the United States today. It's because there was anti-Semitism generations ago, but it didn't manifest itself in attacking the Jewish students in the university. It manifested itself in other ways. But these were students, their fellow students, who shared their philosophies, who shared their attitudes in life. But in every generation, in Europe, they used to write, they used to put posters, they used to scream, the Jews should go back to Palestine. And today, they say the Jew has no right to be in Palestine. B'chol dor v'dor, even though the attitudes of each generation is different. Omdim aleinu l'chalseinu, v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyadam. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves us. Now, we have to understand. So, I think, and the ultimate redemption, of course, the ultimate redemption is the coming of Mashiach. That that's the ultimate redemption of the Jewish people. So I think that this is in a sense, we look forward. We are looking forward. When we read the Hagaddah is a blueprint of the future salvation of the Jewish people. And that salvation can take place as soon as possible. And we use the what happened in Egypt as an inspiration to have that attitude. As a matter of fact, and this, we say now. Let's continue the Hagaddah in the Halachmanya. Kol dichvin yeseh v'yechol, kol ditzvach yeseh v'yiftach. Whoever is hungry, let him come in and eat. Whoever is in need, whoever needs the carbon Pesach, so let him come and join us with Pesach. What's going on here? And what does this have to do with Halachmanya? The Chala, the son of Har Mitzrayim, especially if you say, B'vehil Yatzu Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. I think the Brisker Rav says a very interesting thought. He says, Kol dichvin yeseh v'yechol. That's this year. This year we're in Golus. This year we're in exile. This year we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. This year we can't give the Pesach sacrifice. So we invite those who are hungry to come in and join us for the Pesach sacrifice. No, excuse me, for the Pesach meal. There's no Pesach sacrifice, but there is a meal. There is matzah, there is maror. But we're not just extending an invitation for this year. We're extending an invitation for next year because we look forward to next year to being in Yerushalayim Habnuya. We're looking forward to next year to be in the Beis HaMikdash, to give the Korban Pesach, like we say in the Bracha B'Asher Go'alanu. So that's why. So kol dichvin yesei, let him, whoever is hungry, let him come in and eat this year. But that's not the limit of our invitation. Kol ditrich yesei b'yiftach, whoever needs, whoever is chayav, whoever is required, let him join us with the Korban Pesach. This year he can't join us with the Korban Pesach. There is no Korban Pesach this year. But there might not be a Korban Pesach this year. But in addition, even if there had been, it's too late to invite him in. You had to be l'fim nuyav. You had to be made part of the group, Erev Pesach, when the Korban was brought. How can you invite someone in for the Korban Pesach late at night? But this invitation is not just for this year, it's for next year also, when we'll have the Korban Pesach. We're emphasizing the fact that next year we intend to be in Yerushalayim. Next year we intend to give the Korban Pesach. Sorry. Next year we intend to give the Korban Pesach. So next year we intend to give the Korban Pesach. So, and that, boy, Hashata Hacha. This year, unfortunately, we're over here. We're in Golos. L'shana haba b'aretz Yisrael. Next year we'll be in the land of Israel, and in a situation where we'll be able to give the Korban Pesach. Hashata Abdei. We are slaves today. Unfortunately, all over the world, to a certain degree, we are still slaves politically. The nations of the world, the UN sends its workers, has workers that were not scared to join the terrorists on October 7th. L'shan haba b'nei chorin. Next year we will really be free. So this is the halach manya. But what is it based on? It's based on the fact that we're looking forward. We're looking forward to next year. What does that have to do with Pesach? Okay, we use Pesach, but the mitzvah is Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, remembering the redemption from Mitzrayim. What does it have to do with the Gula? Yes, it's a requirement to look forward to the Gula. I heard from my father that Reb Chaim felt it's not just a requirement to look forward to the ultimate Gula, but you have to look forward to the Gula taking place very soon. And it's very interesting. The Rambam, my uncle pointed out, the Rambam says in Hilchos Tshuva that Ein Yisrael Negolen El B'Tshuva, the Jewish people will only be redeemed in Tshuva. Uchfor Hivticha, if they do Tshuva, but then the Rambam adds Uchfor Hivticha Torah, Shasidim Yisrael Lasos Tshuva. There is a commitment from the Torah that the Jewish people will do tshuva. In other words, there's a question. On one hand, we are required to believe that Mashiach is going to come. Not only we're required to believe, but according to Reb Chaim, achakalo b'chol yom sheyavo, doesn't mean that I'm waiting for 100 years from now. Of course, that's included. But achakalo means I'm looking forward today to Mashiach coming today. It was Reb Chaim who said it, not the Lubavitcher Rebbe, not just the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So the Chavetz Chaim, everybody knows how the Chavetz Chaim focused on the learning of Kachim. He was a Kohen. And why did he focus on the learning of Kachim? He focused on the learning of Kachim because he was looking forward to Mashiach coming at any moment. You know, when I was a young boy, so in all the yeshivas, I'm sure there were people that will contradict it with the new rewriting, the constant rewriting of Jewish history. But in all the yeshivas, they used to sing at Shalos Shudis, Zol Shein Zayin de Gula, Mashiach Zol Shein Kumen. The Gula should be right now. Mashiach should come right now. But as soon as Lubavitch adopted the song, We Want Mashiach Now, that song disappeared from the yeshiva world. But this was the song. It wasn't just these words necessarily, but this was the idea that Jews had in their hearts. They're always looking forward to Mashiach coming soon. Do we need the threat of pogroms over our heads at any moment to have to believe that Mashiach can come right away? And is the threat of a pogrom over one town a bigger threat than what happened and what is happening in Eretz Yisrael? Look how low we have sunk in terms of our bitachon. I was born in 1949. And the shuls I davened probably were mostly survivors, refugees who perhaps got out. You constantly heard about looking forward to Mashiach coming. But somehow that disappeared with the scene. And I'm not talking about those who didn't go to yeshiva. I'm talking about those who did go to yeshiva. Is our Ikrei Ha'amuna dependent on politics? Was the Chavetz Chaim and Reb Chaim wrong? Of course, to let you know that Mashiach came, but you should look forward to Mashiach coming at any moment. Looking forward to Mashiach coming any moment means that you have to believe that he could come at any moment. It doesn't mean he necessarily will come at the next moment. But you have to look forward to his coming at the next moment. And then the question is, but the Rambam says, "En Yisrael nigolan el b'tshuva, uchvar hivticha Torah shasidin Yisrael lasos tshuva." The answer is, we have that the faith. And my uncle once said, the faith we have in the coming of Mashiach is grounded in our faith in Klal Yisrael. We have to believe that Klal Yisrael can do tshuva at any moment. So the purpose of the Hagaddah, and I'm going to explain why. The purpose of the Hagaddah is to emphasize that the Gula from Egypt is a blueprint for future generations. And it's the ultimate goal is the Gula from this Golus, from the exile that we presently are in. And so this is why, but we have to understand, what does it have to do with Pesach? What does it have to do with Pesach? Why is there such a din in the mitzvah Pesach? Now take a look in the Hagaddah. It's really a Mishnah in Brachas. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Harei Anika ben Shibim Shana, Ulo Zachisi Shitelma Yitzias Mitzrayim Belelos. There are two mitzvahs of Schiras Yitzias Mitzrayim. One mitzvah of Schiras Yitzias Mitzrayim, of remembering the redemption, is Pesach night. When we deal with it at length, we deal with it, the particulars. We don't speak. This is a problem. Sometimes we generalize. We talk about Yitzias Mitzrayim. But sometimes when we generalize, we don't see the full picture if we don't look at the details. Perhaps every day we can't look at all the details, but there should be some times that we focus on all the details. So Pesach night is dedicated to remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim, to remembering the Exodus, but with the perspective of all the details. But every day and every night, there is a mitzvah, L'man Tizkor Yom Seischa Me'eretz Mitzrayim Kol Yemei Chayecha Hayomim Kol Yemei Chayecha Haleilos. That you'll mention Yetzias Mitzrayim all the days of your life. Days of your life, those are the days. Kol Yemei Chayecha Haleilos, all the days of your life, night. In other words, every day and every night, we have to make mention of Yetzias Mitzrayim in a general way. Pesach night, it's in a detailed manner, and the Torah tells us but there is a question. There is a question. So there are two separate mitzvahs. One mitzvah is at night. Is every day, and one mitzvah is Pesach night. And there is an argument between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and the Chachamim. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that the mitzvah of mentioning it every day is a mitzvah of mentioning it every day and every night. A mitzvah d'oraisa, a biblical mitzvah, every day and every night. But that mitzvah it seems from Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah does not apply. From the Rambam, it doesn't appear that way. But the simple reading of the Mishnah, that mitzvah does not apply when Mashiach comes. And the Chachamim say the mitzvah is to mention it once in a 24-hour period, Yomim. But we'll also have to mention it when Mashiach comes. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Ben Zoma, who agreed with Rabbi Elazar Ben Zoma, said to the Chachamim, Ben Zoma said to the Chachamim, how could you say that we're going to mention every day the Exodus from Egypt? How can you say we're going to mention it every day? But are we going to mention every day Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, when Mashiach comes? But it's mentioned in the pasuk, Hinei Yomim Boim Num Hashem. There's coming days when people say that the people will not say they won't say about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, about God taking the Jews out of Egypt, but they will talk about God bringing the bringing the Jews me'artzos phonos from the northern kingdoms. That means when Mashiach comes, he'll talk about bringing the Jews from Golus back to Eretz Yisrael. So this was the question Ben Zoma asked the Chachamim. Well, you say that the mitzvah is only in the day, but it applies when Mashiach comes. I say the mitzvah is in the day and in the night, every day and every night. When Kriya Shema, we say, Ni Hashem Elokechem asher otzeisi eschem eretz Mitzrayim lios b'chem le'elokim. So it applies every day and every night to mention the Exodus. But it doesn't apply when Mashiach comes. So there's a question against the Rambam. If there are two mitzvahs of Zikaron Yetzias Mitzrayim, so why is it that the Rambam doesn't include it in the list of the 613 mitzvahs? And Reb Chaim said, I have some questions about it, but Reb Chaim said that the Rambam passes like Ben Zoma. That seems pretty clear. And according to Ben Zoma, they will not mention Zikaron Yetzias Mitzrayim when Mashiach comes. And the Rambam in the Sefer Mitzvos, where he delineates the 613 mitzvos, one of the rules is only a mitzvah that applies forever is included in the 613 mitzvos. So the question is, Reb Chaim, one of the answers, Reb Chaim gave a number of answers. But one of the answers is, we passing like Ben Zoma, it won't apply when Mashiach comes. So therefore, it's not included in the 613 mitzvahs. The 613 mitzvahs are permanent mitzvahs. And when Mashiach comes, people are not going to say every day about Yetzias Mitzrayim, about the Exodus from Egypt. So Rav Zalman Meltzer, who was the student of Reb Chaim, he mentions Reb Chaim's answer, and he says he disagrees, because the Pasuk says people will not mention about the Exodus, but they will talk about the miracle of the Jewish people coming back to the land of Israel from the northern kingdoms. When Mashiach comes, the people returning from Golus, the people returning from exile. So the mitzvah will be forever. It just will have it a different form. Now, the truth is, I don't understand Rav Zalman Meltzer. If it's a different form, it's a different mitzvah. Till Mashiach comes, there'll be a mitzvah of talking. Laman Tiskors Yom Tzeischa Me'eretz Mitzrayim. You should remember the day you went out of the land of Egypt. And after Mashiach comes, there'll be a different mitzvah. Neither of those mitzvahs will be all along. One mitzvah will begin after Mashiach comes, and the other will end after Mashiach comes. One is a mitzvah of talking about how we were redeemed from Egypt, and the other is a mitzvah how we were going to be redeemed, how we were redeemed from exile. But it's two separate mitzvahs. So how could Rav Zalman Meltzer say the mitzvah of Zikaron Yetzias Mitzrayim will continue even after Mashiach comes? And I think what we have to say, according to Rav Zalman Meltzer, and this Yesod, I think, applies according to everybody, that Zikaron Yetzias Mitzrayim, remembering about the Exodus from Egypt, is not just we remember the Exodus as the blueprint of recognition of God as our Savior. So, Hine Yomim Bomim Hashem Asher Lo Yamar Chai Hashem Asher Heles Bnei Yisrael Meretz Mitzrayim. Later on, when Mashiach comes, the greater perspective of seeing God as our Savior will be more manifest with recognizing what God did in redeeming us from the exile. In other words, Yetzias Mitzrayim is not to just be seen as Exodus from Egypt, but it's a relationship of God being our Savior, God being our King, God being our Redeemer. It's an ongoing relationship. And it's very interesting. In the Hagaddah, we say that Baruch Shomer Havtachasol Yisrael. Blessed is he who remembers his commitment to the Jewish people. Lord Baruch Hu, Shakadosh Baruch Hu Chishe Besekates. When God, because God told Avraham Avinu that the Jewish people will be in exile, will be enslaved for 400 years. And we know they were in Egypt only for 210 years. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu manipulated that somehow the 400 years should begin from an earlier period of time. He used a form of mathematics that began from the time Yitzhak was born. There are all kinds of different opinions how the 400 years were accounted for. Now, the Rambam's Girsa text is not Chishev Esakates, but the Rambam's text of the Hagaddah is Mechashev Esakates. God now is counting the years, like He said to Avraham Avinu in redeeming the Jews from the exile of Egypt. In other words, there's a question here, and this is really the whole Hagaddah. Everybody asks a question. The question is, why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned in the Hagaddah? It's mentioned once. Why is he not mentioned in the Hagaddah? And everybody gives the same answer. The same answer is because ani v'lo malach, ani v'lo hashliach. The focus of the Hagaddah is God took us out of Egypt. So we don't want to place Moshe Rabbeinu there. However, if you take a look at the Rambam, when he talks about the Arba Banim, he emphasizes that you have to say how God redeemed the Jewish people with Moshe Rabbeinu. So I think there's a much simpler answer. Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't be the figure of Yetzias Mitzrayim. The figure of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the redeeming figure, the leader of the redemption, is Avram Avinu. Not Avram Avinu wasn't alive, but it is the commitment. The whole Hagaddah focuses on God's commitment to Avram Avinu and that commitment is not limited to the Exodus. It's not limited to the Jewish people going to Eretz Yisrael in the time of Yeshua. That commitment is an everlasting commitment. And to a certain degree, that's why the Jewish people perhaps had to go down to exile in Egypt. Why do we have to go down? Because we are the only ones that were able to survive exile as a nation. Because in our very formation as a nation, we underwent exile, we underwent slavery, and we were redeemed. So this is the idea. The Rambam says, Baruch HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mechashev Esakates. He's trying his best to limit the Golos, the exile, Mechashev presently, Kamo Shamar Avram Avinu, in the same manner that he told Avram Avinu about the redemption from the exile of Egypt. The same thing he's trying to do now. So, in other words, all of this is part of the Brisbane Hapsarim. And Avram is the main character. Avram and the Avos. And Pesach is a celebration, not just of the redemption, but it's a celebration of the recognition of HaKadosh Baruch Hu keeping his Haftacha to the Avos and his continuing to keep his Haftacha to the Avos. And this is both on a spiritual level as well on a physical level. At the very from the beginning, our ancestors were Ovdei Avodah Zarah. Terech Habi Abraham. Abraham was brought up in a house of Avodah Zarah. And now HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us close as Avodah. He should say, V'kirav HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Abraham. What do you mean? So we're contrasting it with Avram. What's going on here? But it's very interesting. You look at the Hagaddah, it doesn't say bit chila at the beginning, made chila. In other words, sinning is something that was unfortunately repeated throughout Jewish history. And it started, he was a baby, but he was brought up in a house of Avodah Zarah. But v'achshav kevana hamakom lavadaso. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought Avram close to him, and even future generations. Future generations repeat it time and time again. Uzzah, the Tsar of Mitzrayim in Egypt, halolo of the avodah zarah, halolo of the Tsar. Why do you show preference to Jewish people? The angel of Egypt said to God, they're idol worshippers, and the Jewish people are also idol worshippers. But we had the Avos, and what happened to the Avos repeats itself. Mitchilo of the avodah zarah, and to a certain degree, the Ben Russia asked the question, and we don't answer him. But there is an answer. The answer is that the answer is that there is tshuva. Baruch hamakom baruch hu. Baruch Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbeinu. So that Hakadosh Baruch Hu saves us spiritually over and over, time and time again, and even physically. So what happened in Mitzrayim was a repeat of the situation that Avram found himself in. And what happened in Mitzrayim, it was on a national level. And this repeats itself throughout Jewish history. But throughout Jewish history, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God brings us close. As the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva says, the Torah already gave a commitment that the Jewish people will do tshuva. And the same thing is on a mundane level. Lavan tried to destroy Yaakov. Bikesh la'akor hakol. And again, to a certain degree, and at a certain point, it was even more limited. Paro tried to destroy the Jewish people. God saves us from their hand. In other words, this repeats itself throughout Jewish history, and all of this is part of the Brisbane Hapsarim, and that's what the whole Hagaddah is about. The whole Hagaddah is about that, about that. And it's interesting. In Parshas Kisisa, the Torah says, the Moshe, when he says, he wanted to, in a sense, be aware of God's actions, to understand that Racham, Chanan, Erechapayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, he says, I'm setting a makom for you. I have a place for you that you could be able to understand when I pass by and I say my midos, Brachum, Chanun, Erechapayim, Rav Chesed, Ve'emes. And so Rashi points out, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mekomo Sholom, but Eina Olam Mekomo. God is the place of the world, but the world is not the place of God. And Makom Iti, I have a place for you to be together with me. But I'm not in that place, but it's a place for you. What does that mean? That was said after the Egel. The Jews were estranged from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At a certain point, HaKadosh Baruch Hu suggested the destruction of the Jewish people. But there's always a place. God leaves a place for us to make a connection with him, even from afar. Even for the Ben Russia, there's a place from afar. Makom iti, there's a place for you to be together with me. You, the Ben Russia, you who built the golden calf. Moshe was representing Klal Yisrael. Moshe himself, was not involved. But there's a place, Makom iti, and that's why HaKadosh Baruch was called Makom, because he makes a place for man to be together, man who is estranged from him, to come we say Yom Kippur, Aldas Hamakom, Aldas Zman, Anu Matirin Lispalim of our Yonim. And the same thing is true about the physical enslavement. Lavan wanted to destroy the Jewish people. Then Paro repeated it for the nation. But all of that is part of the Bris Bein Absarim. And that's why it's not because the Haftorah ends with the words, but it's because not because it's the words of the Haftorah. If it's based on the words of the Haftorah, it's only based on the beginning. It's because these words are the ideas behind Pesach. As we go into Pesach, from the Shabbos before Pesach, we have to understand that the Geula from Egypt is just the beginning of our national relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there, and he's there to save us throughout the generations. That was part of the Havtacha. That was part of the commitment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Avraham Avinu. And this is what he says. I'm sending Eliyahu Hanavi, who is going to proclaim the Geula. Lifnei bo yom Hashem Hagadol v'hanora, the great day. The Heishiv Leivavos Sabonim, and the children will help the Avos return, and the Avos and the ancestors will help the children return, and there'll be a return to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and Yisrael will be Nigolin, will be redeemed with Shuvah. And so, but why is it this Shabbos? It's more than just that. It's more than just it's the Shabbos before Pesach. Chazal tell us that Ilu Shamru Yisrael Shnei Shabbosos Miyad Nigolin. If the Jewish people observe 2 Shabboses, they will be redeemed. Why 2 Shabboses? My father would say the first time people try things out, the second Shabbos shows a commitment. Okay, whatever the reason is, there are many other possible answers that could be given. If the Jewish people, now, Nisan is the beginning of the year. Shabbos Hagadol is always the second Shabbos of the year. Symbolically, that represents, if Pesach represents Geula, redemption. And when we talk about representing redemption, it's not just the redemption from Egypt. It's talking about all the redemptions, all the salvations, and particularly the redemption of Mashiach. So the Pesach always comes after the second Shabbos that the Jewish people observe. That's symbolic. I should say those 2 Shabbosos represent the 2 Shabbosos. The first 2 Shabbosos of the year represent that as soon as the Jewish people observe 2 Shabbosos, the Gulas Mitzrayim will repeat itself with the Geula from the present exile. And the present and the Geula from the present exile is called Yom Hashem Hagadol. So this is the Shabbos Hagadol, because this is the Shabbos, this symbolically. It could be any other 2 Shabbosim, but the first 2 Shabbosim symbolize that as soon as the Jewish people observe 2 Shabbosim, they will have the redemption. So that's what it says. So this is how we could explain the term Shabbos Hagadol, because in the Haftorah, in talking about it, it's not just because the Haftorah mentions the word Gadol, but in the Haftorah talking about the Geula of Mashiach, it refers to it Yom Bo Yom Hashem Hagadol, and this is the Shabbos that brings it, so it's called Shabbos Hagadol. Okay, we'll leave it here.
If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. I have one question off topic, so I'll wait.
Yeah, okay.
I was trying to remind people on the YouTube page. Or maybe I'll try to put that link in. We have shiurim from previous years, also on the YU Torah page. Is that why we redeem a Jewish slave from stealing? I don't understand that question.
Okay. Well, we have to redeem a Jew. We try to
Oh,
redeem
that they
all
shouldn't be a
Jews.
slave to probably that they shouldn't be a slave to slaves.
That's right. That's right. That's correct. That's what I meant.
Here's a link to the YouTube page. You have to search through that. But there are Hagaddah shiurim from previous years. Okay, so I don't know if this was the connection, but being slaves to money or not. But one of our listeners from Eretz
Yeah,
Yisrael.
I have to go.
Okay,
So
okay, yeah,
I'm
it's not on the topic, so I'll ask
oh,
you. Tell you his
yeah.
answer.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Okay, shkach, have a chag kasher sameach, everyone.
Yeah, okay.